Right, well, thank you all for coming, although most of you didn't have a choice in the matter. The Monkees, of course, were not the first manufactured stars. I mean, you go back to the 50s, you find that. But they were probably the first of the manufactured groups, I think.
I would say that's right. What marks them out from the people that you're talking about, you know? In fact, you can re-examine the whole idea of the term manufactured, can't you, in a sense? Because in one way, all popular music is manufactured, because it's all produced, it's dressed, it's marketed, it's stuck in a rack, you know, with a price on. But in terms of manufacturing, in terms for a market, specific market, the teen idols of the 50s were made to sell records, whereas the difference with the Monkees was that the visual dimension. We're in the television age by 1965 when the idea was first kicked around, and it was the purpose, if you like, initially was to create a TV phenomenon rather than a traditional music live concert record sale phenomenon.
But surely as part of that, from what had emerged with the Beatles, and obviously they owed a lot visually to the Beatles films, well, particularly Hard Day's Night, was the merchandise as well. And they were probably the second act to really, or for someone to make a fortune from the merchandising as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, the music was a secondary, but the merchandise was a third.
As far as the people who constructed the music was important, because, you know, you can't have a pop group without music. Even an imaginary one has got to have music. But in terms of the merchandising, they were the first group where that was absolutely locked. That was absolutely locked into the deal. The Beatles merchandising was kind of. It was almost kind of improvised. So, like the first time they went to America, Brian Epstein was sort of, you know, he was approached by some people and he hadn't really thought about it, and he thought, oh, that's a good idea, so we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll do the other. Yeah. Whereas the whole deal with the Monkees was, if you look at the old trade ads, you know, they talk about it, you know, in that way. They talk about, you know, potential audience, potential market, spin-offs, all that kind of stuff was coexistent with the music. You know, it was, the records were there, but so were the pencil cases and the magazines and the posters.
What were they seeing as the potential spin-offs?
Sorry?
You said potential spin-offs. What did they view as potential spin-offs?
Oh, well, the marketing and the merchandise and the, you know, the magazines and the wigs and the Davy Jones glasses, you know, and all the usual clutter that, you know, is we're used to seeing now. You know, as no sooner does a group achieve a kind of commercial traction than their faces appear on a product of some sort. You know, an act that's targeted at a certain audience, obviously, not necessarily every act that succeeds, but acts that are targeted at a young audience.
It actually ended up at an interesting mix of two musicians and two former child stars. So you had two who had acting experience and two who had musical experience. But was that more happenstance than anything else?
No, that was. Well, it was happenstance insofar as they didn't know who was going to walk through the door or answer, you know, the call, the famous call for the auditions. But it was once they had the people, once they had the mixture of people that they were considering, then that seemed like a good deal, because they needed the musical dimension. But of course, they also needed somebody who, you know, knew how to hit the mark. If they had, in fact, they tried initially. They wanted the Lovin' Spoonful, a group of sort of contemporaries, kind of New York contemporaries of Peter Tork. They wanted the Lovin' Spoonful to be cast in a series, but they couldn't act. You know, the music was brilliant and the vibe was right with the music, but you know, they couldn't knock their way out the paperback. So there was that kind of combination of the musical element, which, you know, they needed a product to sell, and the acting element, experience, and to some extent a recognisable face as well.
And yet, musically, initially at least, they took all the control away from the band. And I mean, I think on the first 2 albums at least, did they even play on any of them play on the albums?
Well, the received wisdom is that the first 2 albums they were kind of locked out of.
Yeah.
And that's kind of about 85% true. On both of the first 2 albums, Michael Nesmith has 2 songs. Then as now and all the years in between, very sort of businesslike and canny, and tends to get what he wants. And he argued that he wanted to produce, he wanted his songs on the albums, which of course meant plenty of money, but also he wanted the creative freedom to have his songs on there and choose who played on there. Those first 2 albums, a lot of the stuff is played by a band called the Candy Store Prophets, who were Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart's group, and Boyce and Hart wrote lots of the early songs, Last Train to Clarksville, I'm Not Your Stepping Stone, and the famous theme from the Monkees TV show.
For some reason, I thought it was the Wrecking Crew.
It's the Wrecking Crew on the Nesmith tracks.
Okay.
So, like for example, on the first album, Papa Jean's Blues, and I can't remember the other one, the 2 Nesmith tunes, that's the Wrecking Crew. But on the rest of it's the Candy Store Prophets. And I think on the second one, which is more of a mixed bag, it's maybe sort of 60-40, maybe 50-50. But that was the stuff. So on the songs that were kind of given to them in that way, you hear Mickey DeLenz singing, or you hear Davy Jones singing, and that's the Monkees' contribution, vocal contributions. I think Peter Tork tells a story of turning up with his guitar to one of the early sessions, and the producers just sort of laughing at him, saying, "What have you brought that for? You know, we did the track 3 weeks ago. You know, we just, all you've got to do is sing, and then go away again and spend another 3 days on the set, doing the TV show." I mean, partly they didn't have the time, even if they'd been granted the luxury of writing and recording their own stuff right from the beginning. They just didn't have the time because they were doing that and doing the television program and trying to rehearse in order for their to do live concerts once the scale of the success became clear and that there was a demand for it.
It's live initially they just toured in America, didn't they?
They did, yeah. The first gig was in Honolulu, something like New Year's Eve or something, 66, I beg your pardon. And the logic, I think, was that they would have it as far away as possible, pre-internet age, as far away as possible from the music business. They'd have it in Hawaii. So if it was a disaster, well, not many people were there and nobody really knew about it and it wouldn't get reported, etc., etc. But it wasn't, and so shortly afterwards they started playing. Touring.
So what was the live lineup? Was it the 4 of them, or?
It was the 4 of them. They would have a support act. Initially it was the Candy Store Prophets, actually, doing their own sort of set, Boyce and Hart doing their own stuff. I had the pleasure of talking to Bobby Hart on the phone not long ago. I was asking him about this, and they weren't announced as the guys who wrote Last Train to Clark. They were just the support band as far as the kids who had gone to the show were concerned. And they would do, their 25 minutes or whatever it was in those days, and then they go off and then the Monkees come on, and then they would play and they would do 20, 25 minutes, and then kind of acknowledging the unique way that they were formed, the separateness of the talents, they would each have a solo spot. And on that solo spot they'd be backed by the support group, whoever it was. It wasn't always the Candy Store Prophets, but that was the format of the show. So Nesmith would do an R&B thing, Chuck Berry tune, Mickey Dolenz did a kind of a James Brown tune, lived out his little James Brown fantasy. Davey did a few, as you'd expect, Broadway style numbers, and Peter Tork did folk tunes on his own. Actually, the band didn't support him; he just tended to do his folk tunes on his banjo.
It's of course they did cause some controversy over here with one single. It seems ridiculous now that a single titled "Randy Scouse Git" should have been banned. Well, the title banned and had to come out under alternate. Was it alternate or alternative title?
Alternate title.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is the title is a classic bit of Mickey Dolenz, kind of counterintuitive, because he said, well, you'll have to come up with an alternate title, because the phrase "Randy Scouse Git," it came from when they were on tour. They did a short tour in. Well, it wasn't really a tour. They just did a week of shows at the old Empire Pool in Wembley, what's now Wembley Arena, I guess. And a big television programme at the time was "Till Death Us Do Part," Alf Garnett.
Yeah.
And his son-in-law in the programme, Anthony Booth.
Sherry Booth's father.
Sherry Booth's father, yeah, father-in-law to Tony Blair. Played a scout. Well, he is a scouser. He's a scouser in the series.
And Randy Scouse Git was one of the catchphrases.
One of the insults, yeah, that he would
which
throw
is
at him.
basically so surprising that it was banned in a way. But
yeah, and of course in America
it meant nothing to
no, if you look on the American copy of Headquarters, it wasn't released as a single actually in America. So if you look at the American copies of Headquarters, it says Randy Scouse Git is listed as that. But on the English copies, British copies, it's the alternate title.
I mean, I have to confess, the first LP I ever bought was more of the Monkees. 32 and 6 downstairs at Woolworths.
Yeah.
I don't think I actually owned any Monkees singles. But they actually had... There was some crack songwriting, crack pop songwriting for the time.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, you know. I mean, I'm kind of an advocate of this school of thought, really. That the story of how they got free of their kind of manufactured roots, or tried to get free. It's arguable that they ever did, but tried to escape that and become a quote-unquote real group. Is so thrilling and so unprecedented and so rich, you know, in the consequences that it's had for pop music that's come after. You know, that drama tends to get focused on, and the earlier stuff, those two albums, Monkees and More of the Monkees, tend to get viewed a little bit as just sort of flim-flam, you know, lightweight. But if you look at who wrote songs on those records, Neil Diamond, Carole King and Jerry Goffin, Man and Vile, Neil Sedaka, Carol Bayer Sager, David Gates, you know, all these people got their break. Well, they didn't get their break, but you know, they're no slouches, any of them.
Yeah.
And David Gates certainly got his break.
Oh, absolutely.
That got his career underway, getting the track on the first Monkees album. So, although those records have the reputation of being, you know, a bit thin and just sort of teeny bop stuff, undeniable quality songwriting is actually there. The songs are kind of interpreted through the rest of what was going on, you know, the mania and the phenomenon. But if you actually just listen to the songs, there's some great stuff. That's why they were popular. You know, if the songs were mediocre,
I mean,
they wouldn't have been popular.
And of course, the songs had automatic publicity from a song each week on the television show.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a circle, really.
It was a bit of an electrical circuit. Yeah.
And
that's right.
I mean, they had some interesting guests on the show as well.
Yeah.
Tim Buckley springs to mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there were two series of the television show, and it's useful for me anyway when I'm writing about them, because they fall either side of the so-called, you know, revolt, where they took over their own, you know, the workers took over the means of production sort of thing. So you can see in the first series, you know, it's sort of anarchic in a good-natured way, and
in a Dick Lester kind of way.
yeah, absolutely. But they're still sort of sweet, and Michael Nesmith is still wearing the bobble hat, and all that kind of stuff. But the second series, which now it's interesting that you mentioned Tim Buckley, because the very last thing that happens in the very last episode of the Monkees TV series is Tim Buckley sitting on the bonnet of a Chevrolet which has been smashed up with a mallet by Frank Zappa earlier on, singing Song to the Siren to the teenagers of America. It's an amazing thing, and it kind of shows you the power that they had at that time, because they could make that sort of thing happen, because that episode Mickey Dolenz directed it, and he loved Tim Buckley, and he thought, we're going to have him on. In the first series, you got American comedians or stalwarts of American TV acting with them, playing heavies or playing the authority figures. Stan Freberg was in a couple of them, Bob Newhart was in one of them, and this kind of stuff. But in the second series, you can see that they freaked. The hair is longer. Davy Jones is like this sort of turned into this groovy guy, rather than this little theatrical music hall Mancunian. And it's a very interesting contrast between the two. It's like what was happening socially and culturally out there to young people in America was being played out, in the characters.
So you almost have the analogue, maybe between the sort of first two Beatles films and Magical Mystery Tour.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, actually. Yeah.
Although actually the second series of the Monkees makes more sense than Magical Mystery Tour.
Yeah, well it does actually, that's true. Yeah.
And it's an interesting transition. Well, when the TV show ended after 2 seasons, was it their decision to end it, or was it the network's decision?
Oh no, it was the network. It was the network. When you look at those episodes, the final episodes, you think, well, it's no wonder that NBC pulled the plug on this, because the old cigar chomping boys would be sitting there saying, what the goddamn, what is this stuff, that we're paying for? And they had plans for a third series, and they wanted it to be more like a kind of, it's going back a bit, but this, the thing that Mickey Dolenz always mentions, Rowan and Martin's laughing, that kind of thing, where it's a bit sketchy, but
which was huge at the time.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I wanted it to be a little bit more like that. I think that's where it would have gone, but they pulled the plug.
Was it still getting good ratings, or have they plunged?
It was getting good ratings, actually, but I think it had been decided that they were trouble by this stage. They didn't stay where they were supposed to stay. Bobby Hart said a very interesting thing to me, because I asked him about this, and asked him what he thought, because in a way, although there were Boyce and Hart songs on every Monkees album, I think, actually right to the end, with the exception of the Head soundtrack, what he thought of it, because obviously if you don't need writers, then the guys who've been feeding you songs, they're kind of pushed to the side a little bit, and he kind of acknowledged that. But the phrase he used to take on it was that they got what they wanted, but they lost what they had, which I think in terms of their commercial grip on the marketplace, and that vast audience that they had for the TV show.
Yeah, because really, after that they pretty much fell off the radar.
They did. Oh, it was just incredible. It was off a cliff, really. After the TV series was cancelled, about three weeks after that, their movie Head premiered, and that was just designed to baffle everybody.
I have vague memories of reading about it. Maybe played in London. I don't think it even probably played in the provinces here at all.
No, it didn't. It wasn't seen in London until 1977.
Oh, okay.
It was 68. It was made, and it didn't show it here until 77. So there was that, and then there was a TV special, final TV special, which was pretty bad. and then Peter Tork quit, and the other three kind of carried on for a couple of albums, and there was an album that was just two of them, that was just Mickey and Davey, and they did that because contractually they were still Monkees. That's the thing to remember. That it wasn't like the Beatles, you know, getting together in a church hall in Liverpool, or R.E.M., you know, finding each other on the campus in Athens, Georgia. You know, they'd been put together like the cast of a TV show, so they were contractually obliged to be Monkees until they bought themselves out of the contract, which is what Tork and Nesmith did, or it ran down, or the contract was cancelled, which is actually what happened.
Okay.
The original contract ran to 1973 from 66. So, you know, if the thing had have kept going, then they'd have been working well into the 70s.
Well, I mean, Nesmith was financially in a lucky position because his mother invented Tipp-Ex.
Yeah, liquid paper. Although he didn't get that money till a lot later, of course. You know, he inherited that when she died in the 80s. Yeah.
She didn't advance him some to buy him out of his contract?
No, what he did, he traded in royalties. He said, well, look, I'm owed this much for the next 12 months because, you know, they always delay paying royalties as long as they can. And so, well, 6 months down the line, I've got, whatever it was, $500,000 or something. You have that. Like buying himself out of the army thing. So that was how that happened. And Peter did the same. He made a separate negotiation, actually, because obviously he didn't get the royalties in the same way.
I mean, Nesmith was the one who forged a career post-Monkees. And a very interesting checkered career.
Yeah. And not just musical either.
No, because I'm not sure I buy the thing about him being the father of MTV. But he certainly did do stuff with video that nobody had been before.
Yeah, and he certainly had the old cartoony light bulb moment where he thought, well, what about a cable station that just shows music videos 24 hours a day? Would anybody be interested?
Gosh, it would be a great idea now, wouldn't
it? And he kind of went to Sony, and they bought the idea off him and worked it up, and about 3 or 4 years later MTV was born. So you know, he was instrumental in it. He, you know, obviously he didn't bring it to pass, but you know, he kind of I guess can lay claim to at least be partly.
I mean, to me, he made two really experimental albums. And the first was his very first solo album, which was Train Whistle Sings, which was orchestral versions of his songs.
Yeah.
Which is so left field, it's just bizarre.
It is a bizarre record.
And Tantamount to Treason. I mean, yeah, you've got The Garden and The Prism, which is sort of delving into the Eastern philosophy of the mid-70s. And I don't think they really work. That's just my opinion. But
well, what's interesting, certainly about The Prism, which is this thing which he called a book with a soundtrack. So it was an LP, of course, then. But it had like a book with text in it and pictures. So you put the LP on, and almost like the early days of cinema, isn't it? You know, you cue up the reel, and then you put the needle on the record, and then
or like syncing Dark Side of the Moon to Wizard of Oz or something like
that.
For
example. So there's that, but so it was. I mean, he described that particular LP as a medium without a name, which I thought was quite interesting. Whereas now, of course, I mean, you do it, don't you? In your novels, you like have playlists that go with the novels. It's quite it's kind of easy to do now, but then it was very sort of radical idea. So in some ways, that's what he does. I mean, one of the kind of musical things, just to go back, that he's often also either attributed or blamed for was the invention of country rock music, and that's partly because as the most traditionally musical Monkee, or the one with the the biggest amount of songs and the most kind of drive, certainly as an individual, had unlimited studio time. and access, like we were saying with the Wrecking Crew, to the very best musicians, very best session musicians. And he went down to Nashville, the CBS studio in Nashville, famous one where Blonde on Blonde was recorded, you know, like the pictures of the studio in Nashville, famous pictures of Bob Dylan. And he recorded there, lots and lots of stuff. I mean, hours and hours of stuff that had no chance of getting anywhere near a Monkees album. But they all had this, they were kind of different experimentation in different modes. So there'd be like some rock stuff, or there'd be some like almost bossa nova stuff, and some Dylan-esque singer-songwritery stuff. But there was also this hybrid between, you know, kind of rock music, 68, 69 vintage rock music, and country music, primarily through pedal steel guitar.
Yeah, I think he was the only Monkee to have a solo hit single.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Joanne.
Yeah. Joanne.
Yeah.
It was a hit in America, not here. And then much later, a song called Rio was a hit here, but not in America.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. But that's quite right. He's the only Monkee to have and the only Monkee really to have a meaningful solo career.
Yeah.
You know, the others found it very, very difficult after the band broke up. Peter Stork just went home and, you know, helped grow pumpkins in Minnesota, you know, for 5 years. Davy Jones just went on the provincial theatre circuit in this country. He used to come to Leeds at the Grand Theatre.
It's interesting that he would come back to this country.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think he got divorced and he was a bit tired, I think, of America, and he always said that at that time, having the face of an ex-Monkee, it was like being, you know, a wanted man. You know, they were about as unfashionable as it was possible to be in the early 1970s.
What did Dolenz do?
He got drunk, went on a lot, kind of a bender for about 3 years with all sorts of people, but primarily John Lennon, Alice Cooper, Harry Nilsson. So Keith Moon.
So he was part of the Hollywood crew.
Yeah, Hollywood vampires, they used to call themselves. And they were just, you know, infamous for their appalling behaviour. And then he kind of got out of that, and he came here, actually, and got a second career as a TV producer.
Oh.
He worked in Nottingham, producing television programmes for Midlands TV. And what was the thing with Dusty Bin on? 321. He was producer on 321. Unbelievably.
It's
he did that for a bit, and then he got bored with that. You know, he's quite a restless spirit.
It's they obviously suffered in comparison to the Beatles, which was, I mean, you know, it was the obvious comparison. It was meant to be the comparison.
Yeah.
But certainly, at the time the shows were on, I always watched them on television. Of course, there was a dearth of anything for younger people at the time, which helped over here.
Yeah.
But that was not the case in the States. What do you attribute the huge popularity for a couple of years to?
Well, it's a kind of a, like you were saying earlier on, it's like connecting the dots. I was thinking of it like an electrical circuit, and everything was illuminated, and the current was just going round and round and round very successfully for a couple of years. TV show, the sound, you know, the music, the live concerts, and very effective marketing. And also, not only tapping into the zeitgeist and giving young people something. I mean, obviously it was targeted at a younger audience, because at the same time, you know, the Beatles were recording Revolver and Strawberry Fields Forever. Fantastic, of course, but, you know, I just wonder what kind of a, you know, 10-year-old girl in Ohio would have made of Tomorrow Never Knows. You know, it was music for her rather than you know, the kind of the more experimental.
Actually, funny you should
thing.
mention that, because my first wife would have been 12 when Tomorrow Never Knows came out.
Oh, right, okay.
And her older sister loved the Beatles. She loved the Monkees.
Right, there you go.
case in point, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, that was definitely the target audience, because the Beatles, you can see as sort of like proved it was possible, and here's how you did it. And Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider out there in Hollywood. One of the original working titles for the series was actually Liverpool, USA. So that was a very sort of obvious kind of reference to the Beatles. So they, and they said, well, look, this is how you do it. You have 4 of them, and they've got different characters, and one's this type and one's that type. And what you do instead of them making a movie is that you have this little program every week, and you follow the adventures, and we put the songs in. I mean, Hard Day's Night did exactly the same thing, didn't it? The songs are in there, and right at the end, there's big production, early kind of video number for "She Loves You," which was their new single. Because the assumption was always that it was a fad, and in 18 months, they'd have forgotten about the Beatles and it was somebody else.
It just occurred to me that with the Monkees, they're all sharing this house, and really, except for the music, it's almost like a blueprint for Friends.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, it's. I guess you were talking about what it was like and what it was not like on TV at the time. In some ways, it resembled kind of, kids programs, teen sitcoms, wish fulfillment sort of thing. But there was the key difference was there was no authority figure.
Yeah.
These 4 guys were living in this house together, having these adventures, and there was nobody to tell them when to get up, when to go to bed, when to come in. They couldn't make that noise.
Yeah.
Don't do that. That kind of thing. So I guess that was a difference.
True.
And that was a kind of a social difference as well. That suddenly it became possible for young people to live like that.
Yeah.
Or imagine that they could live like that.
Probably more feasible in America than over here, which was a less constrained society at the time.
Yeah.
Marginally.
Yeah.
And of course, reality never intrudes. Vietnam's not there. And,
it's in the movie. But you're quite right, in the TV, I mean, they did that deliberately.
Yeah.
To show that this wasn't just a 90-minute version of the TV show. But yeah, you're right. It doesn't, because it's this little. Why would it? It's a kind of a little utopian creation. The songs weave the spell around.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's an ideal. The whole thing is an idealised life, and in much the same way that Help is actually.
Yeah.
And in that way, resembles Help more than Hard Day's Night. So.
Yes, it does. There's the famous scene. I don't know if we've all seen it, or some of us have seen it anyway, where I think it's Dandy Nichols, actually, to go back to Till Death Us Do Part, who's in Help, and she's on the street, and they arrive, and it looks like they're still living in normal houses.
Yeah.
And then they go through. She says, "Oh, success hasn't changed them." And then they go through the door, and they're in this like super luxury space age pad.
Yeah.
All the 4 houses have been knocked together. So yeah, that kind of dream of living that sort of life. Yeah, it's quite right. It is more like Help.
It's. I probably won't dwell too much on Head because you've had a chance to talk about that quite a lot lately. But what was the impetus for when was the first reunion, and what was the impetus for it?
The first reunion was the first serious reunion was 1986, which was the 20th anniversary, and it was precipitated really by MTV acquiring the rights to the TV show and having a Monkees weekend. So they showed all 53 episodes over a single weekend, and that kind of provoked a new round of an appetite for the music and enthusiasm for them. I mean, in a way, although I would always go for the music rather than the TV show, it's the TV show that has ensured the longevity, I think, because whenever that's repeated, kids like it. I think, who are these guys then? You know, I don't know. That's my students. They say, oh yeah, I've watched that. You know, because it turns up on the cable channels and stuff. Rather than, oh yeah, I've heard, you know, that album that you mentioned. You know, it's the TV thing, I think, that somehow has helped the whole thing survive. So that was the case then, certainly. And shortly after that, there was an album which was pretty awful, which was the three of them, Davey, Mickey and Peter. But still good to have it. It's got a version of Whole Wide World on it. Mickey Tillman sings it. The Reckless Eric tune. And then after that, they would occasionally do stuff together, you know, just do a tour. I mean, really, it was kind of financial, because, you know, their fans, the people who'd been kids in the 60s, you know, by that time, you know, were in their 30s and were ready for a bit of nostalgia, you know. And
plus they had some cash to spend.
And they had some cash to spend on it. So, you know, their little circuit, that peer group, of bands, kind of nostalgia circuit grew up, and, you know, they hitched a ride on it a bit. And then the major reunion was in '97, which was the 30th anniversary. When
that was all four of them.
All four of them did a proper tour. They came to Britain. They recorded an album, which was okay, actually. Although it doesn't sound like the Monkees. It sounds like a '90s rock band, which is kind of weird. But it's all right. And then basically there've been it's never been too long between various sort of reiterations of comeback.
Because
since
Nesmith signed up for some tour and then quit partway through or before it started.
Yeah, up to '97.
Oh, okay.
He came to Britain. He did the UK and Europe bit, and then when he went back to America for reasons that have never been really disclosed, he just didn't turn up for rehearsals, which ticked the rest of them off mightily, of course. But I guess he was in a position to be able to do that.
Well, yeah. Because he's forged quite a little empire, really.
Yeah, he has. He's been a producer of films. So, like, for example, Alex Cox is from the Wirral, filmmaker from the Wirral. His film Repo Man, Michael Nesmith basically paid for that. He produced that. And then a whole bunch of other films through his Pacific Arts company.
Worth mentioning that Repo Man is a very different Repo Man to the Repo Man that was a big cinematic hit.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that Repo Man has achieved cult status.
Yes, absolutely. It's your archetypal cult movie.
With a great hardcore soundtrack.
Yeah. So, you know, he's a sort of a cultural entrepreneur, really, and he was an early adopter, as I believe the saying goes, of sort of virtual performance environments. Has a website called Video Ranch, where people perform, but in kind of avatar form. It's kind of weird. I don't like it very much, really. I think it's a bit weird, but, you know, it's very, very kind of contemporary. The use of contemporary technology seems to interest him.
Yeah, and
environments.
But did he ever manage to reclaim ownership of much of his solo stuff? Do you know?
I'm not sure, really. I'm not sure. I mean, the early albums were on RCA, who released the Monkees stuff. So he was under a kind of revised version of his, kind of renegotiated version of his contract, and then he took charge of his own stuff.
With Pacific Arts.
Yeah, so just kind of an independent sort of arts company, really, that did a bit of music, a bit of film, a bit of video, a bit of publishing, all sorts of stuff.
Although he did have briefly the Countryside label.
He did.
About 73 or so.
Yeah. And he kind of, I think he looked on that as the next stage, you know, in like a little experiment. Well, what's it like to really be in charge of your own affairs? But he kind of got distracted by early video, I think, because I remember there's an interview from 74, 75 where he says, well, the sound-only album, you know, will be dead in 2 or 3 years, which of course is like completely, you know, incorrect. But, you know, he was really beguiled by the idea of music and pictures, moving pictures, you know, creating a new art form, which I guess it did for a while at least.
Because I know he put out Bert Jansch album.
He did.
He put out the Red Road solo. Did he put out much other stuff on that?
Yeah, there's a guy called was it Garland Jeffrey? I can't remember. What's his name?
Not Garland Jeffrey, surely.
No. There's a country singer that he just saw in a bar. He said, "All right, come on, we'll record you." I forget his name actually. But these records sold about, you know, 7 copies each. Yeah. So I think, you know, the realities of that, you know, were instructive.
It's of course there was a big revival of interest with the death of Davy Jones. And 2 of them, it was Mickey and Peter who just toured together, wasn't it?
Yeah, last summer. They doing kind of. I think what's going to happen is that there'll be another reunion of the surviving 3 next year. A big push to, you know, kind of have one more go at, you know, repackaging everything and selling everything for the 50th anniversary. But yeah, Mickey and Peter did.
Perfect time for your book to come out.
Perfect time for the book to come out. But there'll be a lot of competition because Nesmith has written a memoir, and I dare say there'll be lots of other stuff. So, you know, there'll be plenty of books, plenty of stuff. It's going to be a very busy year for them.
I have to admit, I'm not familiar with what they've done on the reissues of the albums. Are there many other tracks in the vaults to go at?
Well, I asked a guy called Bill Inglett, who is a friend of Pat Thompson's.
Yeah, he's at Legacy, isn't he?
That's right. And he is like a sort of an audio detective. You know, he goes and finds tapes that are kind of lost in publishers' archives and stuff, and cleans them up, digitises them and everything. So I was asking him about that. And there is still stuff, but there's been, you know, substantial mining done. It started out quite tentatively, you know, just reissued the album, remastered with like 4 extra tracks on it. People seem to like that. All right, so let's do a 2 CD version, you know, with 20 extra tracks on it. Do people like that? And now you get these kind of huge box sets, which are like 4 CD versions of albums that originally lasted about 28 minutes. You know, it's incredible, really. Enough people, you're looking at one, seem to be interested in buying those things. You know, to make it worth their while. So I guess while the people are still, you know, willing to put their money down, it'll keep coming. But Bill was saying that, you know, it'll be improved sound, or it'll be better formats, or it'll be. But the real kind of riches, I think, are probably already amongst us.
Final question. In your estimation, did they make the transition from teen idols to psychedelia successfully?
Well, in terms of what you can hear in the grooves on the album, some of the time, yes. In terms of popular imagination, once they got past the kind of the giddy, sort of innocent psychedelia, if you know what I mean, around, you know, the summer '67, Summer of Love, that kind of giddiness, which had a kind of sweetness about it, as you know, despite
the innocence,
the innocence of it. Then yes, but you know, in terms of the popular imagination, not at the time. In fact, they were punished for trying. Actually, you know, they
didn't have the credibility.
No, they didn't have the credibility, no matter how they tried or what they did, and that's made clear in the movie Head. The little motif in that film is of them getting trapped in this box. You keep thinking they've escaped from this box, and then they keep finding themselves back in the box. And even right at the end of the film, where you think finally, they jump off a bridge. Actually, you think well, they finally freed themselves, by jumping this huge bridge at Long Beach into the bay. And you think, well, at least they're free. But then you find out that they're still back in the box. But ironically, I think that they do actually receive their due now, both musically and in terms of, the pop culture phenomenon that they were, and all the things, all the influences, all the doors that were opened in popular music cultures, which happened because of the Monkees. How many people got their start writing for the Monkees or playing with the Monkees, or how many people got ideas, audio-visual ideas, the music video, the marketing, all these things you can kind of trace back, to that original example, that funny little television program.
I mean, it's interesting too, connection to punk, because the Pistols used to cover Stepping Stone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a great
song, yeah.
A nasty, dirty little tune. I mean, it's kind of easy to play, but it's also very complicated. So yeah, I can understand why they settled on that one.
Yeah. Plus, it was also for their audience. It would be well known.
Yeah, it would, absolutely.
So it's
they were about 20, weren't they? So they would have been like 10. Yeah. Ideal age for the Monkees when it was first time round.
Well, right, you basically just witnessed what's one of our normal conversations over a cup of coffee.
Right. Yeah, normally it's
actually this is more focused.
It is actually, isn't it? Usually it's should we have another coffee now?
Yeah. But thank you all for coming, even those who had no option. And thanks for doing this.
You're very welcome. It's been a lark. Right, all back to ours. Okay.
Can I ask why was
Yes.
Ed Davey in America at the time of the advert that he received?
Good question. Good question, my friend.
Being the only English person.
He had been on Broadway doing Oliver, because he was the Artful Dodger in Oliver. He'd been in the West End, and then they transferred it to Broadway. And his Fagin was Ron Moody, who was in the famous movie that we know. But of course, by the time they made the movie, A, Davey was already a star, and B, was too old, I guess, so they got Jack Wilde in. But he was there because he'd been on Broadway, and then he got his run finished there, and he actually got a gig in another sort of Dickens musical, a thing called Pickwick, with Harry Seacombe, believe it or not. Yeah, do you remember that one? I was unaware of it till I found this out. And so that went on a tour, and it went to LA, and some people, it was, he was a name, but I think he was like a rising star, and he was encouraged to go to the audition, because he'd already made a couple of teeny pop records.
So the auditions were in LA?
The auditions were in LA, yeah. And
are the other three from that area?
Well, Mickey's from Los Angeles, because his mum and dad were sort of B-movie actors in the 50s. Peter Tork's from Minnesota. His dad was a professor of psychiatry at the university there. So he's kind of an intellectual, really, although he played the dumb in the series. And Michael Nesmith was actually from a dirt poor family, although he's incredibly wealthy now. But he's very, very,
from Texas originally.
Texas, working class. And he married a beautiful girl called Phyllis Barber when they were about 18, and they drove to Los Angeles because they thought, well, that's where you can make your dreams come true, just to give it a try. And he got lucky in that sense. So in a way, him and Peter, the musicians, were the ones who kind of walked in off the street, whereas Mickey and Davey were already in showbiz, because Delenz was also a child star, had
Circus
series
Boy.
in the 50s. Yeah, Circus Boy, when he was about 12 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that you said that Peter York.
With bow tie.
So,
Yeah.
He was the one to lead, not Mike Nesmith. Because
Yeah.
Mike Nesmith was always seen as the one who hated all this.
Yeah, yeah.
Fractured stuff.
Yeah.
But he wasn't the first to go officially.
Well, no, it's not what you'd expect, is it, at all? I mean, really, I think that because the way he explained it anyway was that the third album, Headquarters, that was like Peter Tork's dream come true, you know, that they were actually a real group. And then they made another album after that, and then the movie. And gradually, the others moved away from this idea of them being like a real foursome. So if you listen to later Monkees albums that all four of them are on, it's like 4 different musical registers. So you've got Nesmith's songs, and you've got Mickey's songs, and you've got Davy's songs, and Peter's songs. And it's not like a group, you know, it's like 4 people whose songs are all on. I mean, they're all, some of them are good, some of them are terrible. But you can tell who's who, you know, there isn't a group sound.
Well, Peter Tork was not a gifted songwriter.
Well, he has written some good songs, but he is not prolific. And
I'm thinking, for example, of Anti-Griselda.
Well, that's Voice and Heart, of course.
Is that?
That's Voice and
Oh,
Heart.
actually, I always thought that was his.
No.
Although he sings it, doesn't he?
He played because he has a sort of difficulties. He has confidence difficulties, or at least he did. So that song was actually originally a sort of it wasn't like a comedy song like it is on that record. It was like sort of a, you know, light-hearted R&B thing. You know, like a sort of a Chuck Berry style. I can't get my girlfriend because, you know, a freakish auntie's in the way. But he kind of dropped all that comedy stuff into it, which was a kind of compensatory thing. And, you know, you compare him to, as I say, Michael Nesmith, who made sure that he got his songs on the albums, that he had the best musicians playing on them, and he had the confidence to make that happen. For whatever reason, Peter didn't do that. So, you know, again, it's that sort of the weird mishmash of personalities that you get, you know, if you're casting a television show or a play. It's not like a real group where everybody has to get on and they need to be best mates, don't they? Hi.
Hi.
Welcome to the very end.
Let's start again.
Oh no, we're on the encore. Yeah, no. Oh, it's very sweet of you to come. But it was 7 o'clock. Yeah.
It's late. We're going to get a flood of people late afterwards.
Oh wow. Yeah. Right. Okay, let's go again, everybody. Yeah.
Well, that's really irritating. I made dinner up special so
Oh.
that we can arrive correctly.
Pete, you have to do it all.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. Bobby's been filming it, so you can have a copy of
200
that.
hours to go.
Yeah.
Well, 198.
Yeah. So yeah,
You can get the director's cut DVD with commentary.
Excellent.
Yeah. So that's how David was in Los Angeles at that time. You know, he was a rising star, and he was on tour in America with that production. Sorry?
What was it called?
In Manchester. Yeah.
He played Ina Sharple's grandson on
He did.
Coronation Street.
Coronation Street. Yeah.
I like David. It's good.
Denton,
Yeah.
it's my hometown.
Oh really? Yeah. Well, the street that he was the house where he was born. Of course, it's all been knocked down. But you know, you can find pictures of the area, not exactly the street, and it is exactly that. You know,
Right, yeah,
row
that's
upon
nice.
row of terrace. Yeah.
I've never tracked down where he actually where he grew up, but it's the same place I grew up. So.
Yeah. Oh wow. Wow. Yeah.
Do you know that white tuxedo dance he does in the head?
Yes.
Is he taking the Michael out of that type of thing?
Well,
or is it just a
yes,
homage?
yes, he is. He's kind of like skitting his own
Yeah, I wondered-
role in the
yeah.
programme. They're all kind of doing that a little bit in that film. Yeah. But he also does it brilliantly, doesn't he?
He does it
because
well,
the
but
choreography was
It's
great.
over the
and-
top, like he's
Yeah.
parodying. Really.
Yeah, well, that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
But he's also very good at it, so he can do it right at the same
Yeah.
time as sending it up.
Slightly.
Yeah.
It's a good scene.
So when's the book out then?
I hope it's going to be next summer,
Right.
either June or September. That's the two possible dates.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you must be a fan. Look, you're here and you don't need to be. It's fantastic. Yeah.
No, but just listening to you talking, it's brilliant. It's like me and my mates just sat around having it's good.
Yeah.
It's good to hear that other people are that passionate.
Oh, right. Great.
Knowledge. I remember, not a patch on you in terms of Monkees knowledge. But what got you to the Monkees then? What went? Because you're not from that era.
Well, that's very nice of you to say.
Still a mystery to me. That.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like everybody else who remembers them from, like, because I had an older sister, so she used to watch it. So I used to, hear it, and she had the records and all that kind of stuff. But she also had Tamla Motown and stuff, which I love, but I'm not completely nuts on. So that doesn't explain it in that way. It was just the music, actually.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying, like, often it's the TV show. I think it's the TV show that's really helped it survive, helped the whole thing survive. But I just really like the music.
Yeah.
I like the sound of the voices. I think Mickey Dolenz is a great singer, which nobody could have predicted, but I think he's a great sort of pop, quite soulful voice that he's got. I think Michael Nesmith is a really interesting character and a great songwriter. Really good singer, full of ideas. Davey, as we know, he's kind of irresistible in his own slightly cheesy way.
Very cheesy.
And Peter Tork, I used to like him when I was little because, everybody picked on him and he's sweet and he was childlike, wasn't he, in the programme, he was like confused by everything.
Yeah.
So kids could identify with that.
Yeah.
So that combination worked better for me than the Beatles, like I was a bit frightened of John Lennon, because, you like, do something like that, but there was never any danger of that.
So you've always been a fan of the Monkees then from
from childhood. I mean, it comes and goes, doesn't it, as you're growing up, and you get other periods, like you were saying, Chris, about the Sex Pistols and stuff, Jonathan and I were the same age and friends a long time, and, we got into that, and, that was our thing for a long time, and the stuff that he grew up with settles back for a bit, but then as you get older it comes back, and you reconnect with stuff. So that's kind of how it's happened. But I've always cherished the records. Yeah.
So what was your favourite Monkees album?
Well, I think it's probably Headquarters.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, probably. I dip into the albums, if I'm honest. There's no single album that I take, so I dip into them.
Yeah.
I mean, I've probably got them all. I'm not a huge fan in terms of knowing all of the, everything but but I've got all the records. And
Yeah. I mean, that's one just because you can hear the freedom
in
it.
Is Headquarters for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Because they.
It's interesting. I just have what was the 2 CD best of?
Oh, yeah.
The Listen to the Band.
Yeah.
But I have most of Nesmith's solo albums.
Yeah.
Because back in the early 70s, when Virgin Records was down on King Edward Street,
Oh yes.
you used to be able to get American and cutouts there for some ridiculously cheap price.
What did I bring?
They had some Nesmith albums there.
Yeah.
That's where I discovered his solo work.
Yeah. Now I got this from
I was
Project.
just about to ask you.
Project at Hare Hills.
Yeah.
Magnetic South. It was $1.49.
Yeah.
Which was like 3 weeks pocket money.
The cutout here,
Yeah.
and of course the thick cardboard sleeve,
Mm.
and RCA, but not the
I don't think that's
Not the wibbly
Dynaflex,
wobbly.
Not the super wibbly wobbly now.
no.
We're losing younger people.
Yes,
Yes.
it is. Yeah. It's not wibbly wobbly. Yeah.
This download is not with me.
Which means we should probably stop because we filled an hour anyway. So thank you all for coming, and thanks to Peter for
Well,
imparting
thank
his
you all
knowledge.
for listening to me go on and on and on.
Sounds very interesting.
Yeah.